A wealthy woman threw scalding soup at me in front of 50 people at the city's most exclusive restaurant, humiliating me for wearing a simple dress to my own birthday dinner. But what she didn't know was that the quiet man sitting beside me, the one she dismissed as just another ordinary person, was about to reveal something that would turn her world upside down. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Hi, I'm Emma, and I need to tell you about the night that changed everything for me. But to understand how I ended up in that restaurant with soup dripping down my face, I need to take you back to where it all started 6 months earlier, when my world completely fell apart. Picture this. I'm 28 years old, working as a librarian at the downtown public library, making barely enough to cover my rent in a tiny studio apartment. I've always been what people call ordinary. Average height, brown hair that I usually keep in a simple ponytail, clothes from discount stores that I mix and match to look presentable. I'm not the kind of woman who turns heads when she walks into a room, and I've made peace with that. I find joy in small things, helping people find the perfect book, organizing community reading programs for kids, volunteering at the local food bank on weekends. My life wasn't glamorous, but it was mine, and I was content. Until I met Marcus at a charity book drive I was organizing. He was this incredibly charming man in his early 30s, always dressed in expensive suits, driving a luxury car that probably cost more than I made in 3 years. Marcus worked in finance, something involving investments and portfolio management that I never fully understood, but he made it sound so important, so sophisticated. What attracted me to Marcus wasn't just his success, though I'll admit that played a part. It was how confident he seemed, how he carried himself like he belonged anywhere he went. Growing up in a working-class family, where my dad was a mechanic and my mom cleaned offices at night, I'd always felt like there were certain spaces, certain levels of society that weren't meant for people like me. Marcus made me feel like maybe I could belong in those spaces too. We started dating, and for 8 months, I felt like I was living in a fairy tale. Marcus would take me to restaurants I'd only seen in magazines, introduce me to his friends who worked in law firms and investment banks, bring me to gallery openings and charity events where everyone seemed to know exactly what to say and how to act. I felt sophisticated, important, like I was finally becoming the kind of woman who mattered. But there were signs, red flags, that I ignored because I was so caught up in the excitement of this new life. Marcus would sometimes make comments about my clothes, suggesting I needed to dress better for certain events. He'd buy me expensive outfits, which I thought was sweet at the time, but looking back, I realized he was embarrassed by my simple style. He'd correct the way I held my wine glass at dinners, or whisper reminders about which fork to use, always with a smile, always framed as trying to help me fit in better. The worst part was how he talked about my job. Marcus would introduce me to his friends as Emma, the librarian, but with this tone that made it sound quaint, like I was playing at having a career rather than doing something meaningful. When I'd talk about the literacy programs I was developing or the joy I found in helping kids discover their love of reading, he'd listen with this indulgent smile, like I was a child talking about my imaginary friends. But I pushed down my discomfort because Marcus made me feel special in other ways. He'd tell me I was beautiful, that I was different from other women he'd dated, more genuine, more real. He'd say he loved how down-to-earth I was, how I hadn't been corrupted by wealth and status like so many women in his social circle. I thought this meant he valued me for who I truly was. The end came on a Tuesday evening in October. Marcus had invited me to dinner at Le Bernardin, one of the most expensive restaurants in the city. I thought we were celebrating because he'd just closed a major deal at work. I wore my nicest dress, a simple black number I'd splurged on for our 6-month anniversary, and I felt beautiful. Marcus seemed different that night, distracted, checking his phone more than usual, but I attributed it to work stress. We were halfway through our appetizers when he reached across the table and took my hand. For a moment, my heart soared, thinking this might be the moment he'd propose. We talked about marriage, about building a future together, and I'd started to imagine myself as Mrs. Marcus Whitfield, hosting dinner parties and supporting his career while maybe starting a family. "Emma, we need to talk," he said, and immediately I knew something was wrong. His voice had that careful, measured tone people use when they're about to deliver bad news. "I've been doing a lot of thinking about us, about our future, and I've realized something important. We're just too different. We come from different worlds, and I don't think we can bridge that gap." I stared at him, confused. "What do you mean? We've been happy together. You said I was different, that you loved how real I was." "I do love that about you, Emma. You're sweet and genuine, and any man would be lucky to have you. But I need to be realistic about what I want in a partner, what I need for my career, my future." That's when he told me about Victoria. Victoria Ashford, daughter of one of the city's most prominent real estate developers. Victoria, who'd gone to private schools and spoke 3 languages fluently. Victoria, who understood his world in ways I never could. Victoria, who could help advance his career instead of being something he had to constantly explain or apologize for. "I've been seeing her for the past month," he continued, as if this detail was just another item on a business agenda. "She and I make sense together, Emma. We have the same background, the same goals, the same social circle. With Victoria, I don't have to worry about whether she'll embarrass me at company events, or if she'll understand the references people make at dinner parties." The words hit me like physical blows. Embarrass him? All those times he'd corrected my etiquette or bought me new clothes, he hadn't been trying to help me fit in. He'd been trying to hide the fact that I didn't belong. All those months when I thought he was elevating me, he'd actually been ashamed of me. "So this was all, what, a test run?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. 8 months of my life? Of thinking we had something real? "Emma, what we had was real, but it was also unrealistic. You have to understand. I'm being considered for a partnership at my firm. The woman I marry will be a reflection of me, of my judgment, of my place in society. I need someone who can be an asset, not a liability." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Asset, liability. He was talking about choosing a life partner the same way he'd discuss investment portfolios. I sat there in that expensive restaurant, in my simple black dress that had made me feel so beautiful just hours earlier, and felt smaller than I'd ever felt in my life. Marcus continued talking, explaining his decision like he was presenting a business case, but I stopped listening. All I could think about was how naive I'd been, how completely I'd misunderstood what I meant to him. When he finally finished his explanation, he reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. "I've written you a check," he said, "for your time, for the inconvenience. I know this must be difficult, but I think this will help you get back on your feet, maybe find someone more suitable for your lifestyle." A check. For my time. Like I'd been providing a service rather than giving him my heart. I stood up from the table, my legs shaking, and looked down at this man I'd thought I loved, this man I'd thought loved me. "Keep your money, Marcus. I may not be sophisticated enough for your world, but I have enough dignity not to take payment for being discarded." I walked out of that restaurant with as much grace as I could muster, but the moment I got outside, I fell apart. I called my best friend Sarah, sobbing so hard I could barely speak, and she came to pick me up. That night, curled up on her couch with a box of tissues and a pint of ice cream, I felt like my entire sense of self had been shattered. The next few weeks were the darkest of my life. I went back to work at the library, but everything felt different. The job I'd once loved now felt like confirmation of Marcus's assessment of me. I was just a small-town girl playing dress-up in a world where I didn't belong. The kids I worked with, the literacy programs I'd been so passionate about, even the books themselves, seemed to mock me with their stories of people who overcame obstacles and found their happy endings. Sarah tried to help, taking me out for coffee and reminding me of all the things I'd accomplished, all the ways I made a difference in people's lives. But Marcus's words had planted seeds of doubt that grew stronger every day. Maybe I was too ordinary, too simple, too naive for the kind of love I'd dreamed of. Maybe women like me were meant to settle for less, to be grateful for whatever scraps of affection we could get. I stopped wearing makeup, stopped caring about my appearance beyond basic hygiene. I declined invitations to social events, telling myself it was because I couldn't afford to go out, But really it was because I was terrified of being judged again, of being found wanting. I threw myself into work, staying late at the library, organizing and reorganizing the stacks, creating new programs and initiatives that kept me too busy to think about how lonely I was. It was during this period that I started noticing him. James. He'd been coming to the library for months. Always quiet, always polite, usually checking out books on history or philosophy. He was probably in his late 30s, tall and lean with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He dressed simply, jeans and button-down shirts, nothing flashy or expensive looking. Sometimes I'd catch him reading in the corner by the window, completely absorbed in whatever book he'd chosen, and there was something peaceful about his presence. James never seemed to be in a hurry. While other patrons rushed in and out, grabbing books and leaving, he would take his time. He'd browse the shelves thoughtfully, read the back covers of books with genuine interest, sometimes asking me for recommendations in specific areas. His voice was soft, measured, and he always thanked me for my help with such sincerity that it made me remember why I'd chosen to become a librarian in the first place. What struck me most about James was how present he seemed. When he asked for book recommendations, he listened to my responses with complete attention. When I suggested authors or titles, he'd ask follow-up questions that showed he was really considering my advice, not just being polite. In a world where everyone seemed to be rushing towards something else, James existed fully in whatever moment he was in. One particularly difficult day, about 3 months after Marcus had ended things, I was shelving returns when James approached the desk. I must have looked as terrible as I felt because he paused, his usual book request dying on his lips. "Are you all right?" he asked gently. "You seem like you might be having a rough day." Something about his genuine concern, the lack of judgment in his voice, broke through the wall I'd built around myself. "I'm fine," I said automatically, then surprised myself by adding, "Actually, no, I'm not fine. I'm having a terrible few months, if I'm being honest." James nodded like this was the most natural response in the world. "Would you like to talk about it? I'm a pretty good listener, and I don't have anywhere else to be." There was something so undemanding about his offer, so free of expectation or ulterior motive, that I found myself saying yes. We talked for almost an hour after my shift ended, sitting at one of the small tables in the library's reading area. I told him about Marcus, about feeling like I wasn't good enough, about losing confidence in myself and my worth. James listened without trying to fix anything or offer easy platitudes. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment, then said something that stuck with me. "You know," he said, "I've always believed that a person's worth isn't determined by how impressive they appear to others, but by how they treat people when there's nothing to gain from being kind. In the months I've been coming here, I've watched you help elderly patrons find large print books, spend extra time with kids who are struggling with reading assignments, and recommend perfect books to people based on conversations you remember from weeks ago. That tells me more about who you are than any job title or bank account ever could." His words were like a small light in the darkness I'd been living in. Not because they magically fixed everything, but because they reminded me that there were people in the world who valued kindness and compassion over status and wealth. People who saw worth in simple acts of service and genuine care for others. James and I started talking regularly after that. He'd stay after the library closed, and we'd walk to the coffee shop down the street or sit on the bench outside the building, discussing books, sharing stories about our lives, talking about everything and nothing. I learned that he'd grown up in a small town outside the city, that he'd lost his parents in a car accident when he was in college, that he'd spent several years traveling and trying to figure out what he wanted to do with his life. "What do you do for work?" I finally asked one evening, realizing that in all our conversations he'd never mentioned a job. "I work with investments," he said simply. "Nothing too exciting. I help people make good financial decisions." It was such a modest way to describe what I assumed was probably a financial planning business. But I appreciated that he didn't try to make it sound more important than it was. James never tried to impress me with expensive dates or lavish gestures. Instead, he brought me coffee when he knew I'd had a long day, remembered details about stories I'd told him weeks earlier, and listened with genuine interest when I talked about the programs I was developing at the library. He made me feel heard in a way I'd never experienced before, like my thoughts and opinions mattered simply because they were mine. When he asked me to dinner for the first time, I was terrified. The idea of sitting across from someone in a restaurant brought back all the painful memories of that last night with Marcus. But James suggested a small, family-owned Italian place where the focus was on good food and conversation, rather than being seen or impressing anyone. It was perfect. Over pasta and wine, James told me more about his life, his travels, his love of learning. He talked about the year he'd spent teaching English in a small village in Guatemala, how it had changed his perspective on what really mattered in life. He shared his dream of someday starting a foundation to improve literacy rates in underserved communities, and when he said it, his eyes lit up in a way that reminded me why I'd fallen in love with library work in the first place. That night, walking home under the streetlights, I realized I was falling for James in a completely different way than I'd fallen for Marcus. With Marcus, I'd been in love with the idea of being chosen by someone impressive, someone who could elevate my status. With James, I was falling in love with who I was when I was with him, the way he made me feel comfortable in my own skin. We started dating officially after that dinner, taking things slowly and naturally. James was patient with my insecurities, understanding when I had moments of doubt about whether I was interesting enough or accomplished enough to deserve his attention. He consistently showed me through his actions that he valued who I was as a person, not what I could do for his image or career. 6 months into our relationship, James suggested we celebrate my birthday at Constellation, the most exclusive restaurant in the city. I was hesitant at first, remembering how out of place I'd felt in similar establishments with Marcus, but James assured me he just wanted to make the evening special for me. He helped me pick out a dress, not because he was embarrassed by my usual style, but because he wanted me to feel confident and beautiful. The dress we chose was elegant but simple, a deep blue that complemented my eyes, from a boutique that wasn't outrageously expensive but wasn't a discount store either. When I looked in the mirror that evening, I felt genuinely beautiful for the first time since Marcus had shattered my self-confidence. James's face when he saw me confirmed that feeling. "You look absolutely radiant," he said, and I could tell he meant it. Constellation was everything I'd imagined. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables set with fine china and silver. The other diners were clearly wealthy, dressed in designer clothes and speaking in the confident tones of people who belonged in such places. But with James beside me, I didn't feel intimidated. He held my hand as we walked to our table, introduced me proudly to the maître d', who seemed to know him, and made me feel like I had every right to be there. Our table was in a prime location near the window overlooking the city lights. James had pre-ordered a special birthday menu, complete with my favorite flowers as a centerpiece. Everything was perfect until she walked in. Victoria Ashford. I recognized her immediately from the society pages and from my own painful research after Marcus had left me for her. She was even more stunning in person, tall and blonde with the kind of confidence that comes from never having to question your place in the world. She wore a dress that probably cost more than I made in 6 months, and jewelry that caught the light with every movement. But it wasn't Victoria who made my blood run cold. It was the man beside her. Marcus. My ex-fiancé, looking exactly as polished and self-important as ever, his arm possessively around Victoria's waist as they were seated at a table across the restaurant. James noticed my reaction immediately. "Emma, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." I nodded toward their table, my voice barely a whisper. "That's Marcus. My ex. And that's Victoria, the woman he left me for." James followed my gaze, taking in the couple who were now examining their menus with the casual entitlement of people who'd never had to check prices. "Do you want to leave?" he asked gently. "We can go somewhere else, make new memories." But something in me rebelled against the idea of running away. "No," I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. "I'm not going to let them ruin my birthday. I'm here with you, celebrating another year of life, another year of growth. I'm not the same woman Marcus discarded, and I'm not going to act like it." James smiled, squeezing my hand. "That's my girl. You belong here just as much as anyone else." Dinner proceeded beautifully. James was the perfect companion, making me laugh with stories from his travels, asking thoughtful questions about my work, sharing his own dreams and aspirations. I found myself relaxing, almost forgetting about Marcus and Victoria's presence across the room. The food was exceptional, the service impeccable, and I was having a genuinely wonderful time. That's when disaster struck. Victoria had gotten up to use the restroom, and on her way back to her table, She had to pass by ours. I saw her coming and tried to focus on my conversation with James, hoping she wouldn't notice me or would simply ignore me if she did. But Victoria Ashford was not the type of woman to ignore anything, especially not when it involved her territory. She stopped beside our table, looking down at me with the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. Well. If it isn't little Emma from the library. Marcus told me all about you. How quaint to see you here. Her tone was sickeningly sweet, dripping with condescension. I could feel the attention of nearby tables turning toward us, and my cheeks burned with embarrassment. "Hello, Victoria," I managed to say, keeping my voice as steady as possible. Victoria's gaze swept over my dress, my simple jewelry, taking inventory of everything that marked me as inferior in her world. "This is such an interesting choice of restaurant for someone on a librarian's salary. Are you sure you can afford it here? The portions are so small you might leave hungry, but I suppose you're used to that." James started to speak, but Victoria continued her assault. "You know, Emma, I have to thank you. If you hadn't been so inadequate, Marcus might never have realized what he really needed in a partner. Sometimes it takes dating down to appreciate what's truly valuable." She gestured dismissively at our table, our simple celebration, my careful appearance. It must be so hard, trying to fit into places like this when you so obviously don't belong. But I suppose everyone needs their little fantasies, don't they? Then, in a moment that seemed to happen in slow motion, Victoria picked up her bowl of French onion soup from a passing server's tray. Before I could react, before James could intervene, she dumped the entire bowl over my head. The hot soup soaked through my hair, dripped down my face, and stained my beautiful blue dress. The entire restaurant fell silent, every conversation stopping as dozens of wealthy diners turned to stare at the spectacle. I sat there, humiliated beyond anything I'd ever experienced, soup dripping from my chin, my special birthday dress ruined, my dignity shattered in front of the most exclusive crowd in the city. "Oops," Victoria said with mock concern, her voice carrying clearly through the silent restaurant. "How clumsy of me. But don't worry, I'm sure there's a little diner somewhere that would be more appropriate for your budget." The laughter started then. Not loud, but the subtle snickering of people who felt superior, who enjoyed watching someone beneath them be put in their place. I wanted to disappear, to sink through the floor, and never show my face in polite society again. This was worse than anything Marcus had done to me, worse than being rejected for someone wealthier. This was public humiliation designed to remind me, and everyone watching, exactly where I stood in the social hierarchy. But then James stood up. He moved with calm deliberation, placing his napkin on the table and stepping beside me. His voice, when he spoke, was quiet, but it carried clearly through the restaurant's sudden silence. "Victoria Ashford," he said, and something in his tone made the mockery die on people's lips. "I believe you owe my girlfriend an apology." Victoria laughed, a sharp sound that echoed off the crystal and marble. "And who exactly are you to demand anything from me? Some little nobody who thinks he can afford to bring his charity case girlfriend to a real restaurant?" James reached into his jacket and pulled out his wallet. From it he withdrew a simple business card and handed it to Victoria. His movement was so controlled, so deliberate, that the entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath. Victoria glanced at the card dismissively, then looked again. Her face went white. "James Harrison," he said calmly. "Harrison Technologies. Perhaps you've heard of it." The gasps around the restaurant were audible now. Harrison Technologies was one of the largest tech companies in the country, worth billions. James Harrison wasn't just wealthy. He was one of the most successful entrepreneurs in the nation. The quiet man who'd been checking out philosophy books from the library, who'd talked about helping people make good financial decisions, was one of the richest men in America. But Victoria wasn't finished. Even in her shock, her entitlement was too strong to let her back down completely. "So you're rich," she said, though her voice had lost some of its confidence. "That doesn't change what she is. A simple librarian who doesn't belong in places like this." James's response was calm, measured, and devastating. "Victoria, in the past year, my girlfriend has organized literacy programs that have helped over 300 children learn to read. She's volunteered countless hours at food banks, homeless shelters, and community centers. She's made a real difference in people's lives. Not because she had to, not because it would benefit her, but because she genuinely cares about making the world better. He gestured around the restaurant, at the wealthy diners who were hanging on every word. What exactly have you contributed to the world besides spending your father's money and looking down on people who actually work for a living? The silence stretched longer. Victoria's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, but no sound came out. The same people who'd been snickering at my humiliation moments earlier were now staring at her with expressions ranging from shock to disgust. But James wasn't finished. He turned to address the entire restaurant, his voice carrying easily through the space. This woman, my girlfriend Emma, is worth more than everyone in this room combined, not because of her bank account, but because of her character. She treats everyone with kindness and respect, regardless of their status or wealth. She finds joy in helping others, in making a difference, in being genuinely good. He looked back at Victoria, who was now visibly trembling. You threw soup at her because you thought she was powerless, because you thought no one would defend her. You were wrong on both counts. Emma doesn't need my money or my status to have value. She has value because of who she is. And if you can't see that, then you're the one who doesn't belong in civilized society. The restaurant manager appeared, clearly distressed by the scene unfolding in his establishment. Mr. Harrison, I am so sorry about this incident. Please, let us comp your meal and arrange for cleaning expenses for your girlfriend's dress. James nodded graciously. Thank you, but that won't be necessary. However, I think Ms. Ashford should be the one to cover those expenses, don't you? After all, it was her clumsiness that caused this unfortunate accident. Victoria's face was now red with embarrassment and rage. She fumbled in her purse, threw some cash on our table, and stormed out of the restaurant without another word. Marcus, who had been watching the entire scene unfold from their table, slunk out behind her, his face a mask of humiliation. As they left, something remarkable happened. The other diners, who had been silent spectators to my humiliation, began to applaud. It started slowly, with one or two people, then spread through the restaurant until nearly everyone was clapping. Not for the drama, but for James's defense of me, for his reminder that character matters more than status. James helped me clean up, using his own napkin and water to gently wipe the soup from my face and hair. Are you okay? He asked softly, his concern genuine and immediate. I looked around the restaurant, at the faces now showing sympathy rather than mockery, at the man beside me who had just publicly declared my worth to a room full of strangers, and realized something profound. I was more than okay. For the first time since Marcus had rejected me, I felt truly valued, truly seen, truly loved. The manager insisted on providing us with a private dining room for the rest of our meal, and the chef personally prepared a special birthday dessert. As we sat in the quiet elegance of our new surroundings, James took my hand across the table. Emma, I need to tell you something, and I should have told you sooner. I didn't tell you about my company, about the money, because every relationship I've had since building this business has been about what I could provide rather than who I am as a person. You fell in love with James the book reader, James the conversation partner, James the man who cares about literacy and social justice, not James the billionaire. I understand now why you kept it private, I said. But James, even knowing who you are in the business world, what matters to me is who you are when we're sitting in the library talking about books, or walking through the park planning ways to help kids learn to read better. Your money didn't make you defend me tonight. Your character did. James smiled, reaching into his jacket pocket. Speaking of which, I had planned to wait until dessert, but after tonight, I think the timing is perfect. He pulled out a small velvet box, and my heart stopped. Emma, will you marry me? Not because I'm wealthy, not because it would change your status, but because I love who you are, exactly as you are. The ring was beautiful, but not ostentatious, elegant and classic rather than flashy. It was perfect for me, chosen by someone who truly knew and loved me. Through tears of joy, I said yes. 6 months later, we had a small, intimate wedding ceremony in the library where we'd fallen in love. Instead of an expensive reception, we hosted a community literacy festival, with local authors reading to children and families celebrating the power of books and learning. Our wedding gifts were donations to literacy programs across the city. Victoria and Marcus's engagement had ended spectacularly just 2 months after the soup incident. Apparently, when Victoria's behavior at Constellation became public knowledge, thanks to several diners posting about it on social media, Her father was so embarrassed that he withdrew his support for Marcus's business ventures. Without the financial backing, Marcus's firm collapsed, and Victoria moved on to her next target. Last I heard, Marcus was working for someone else's company again, his dreams of being a partner permanently derailed. But I rarely think about them anymore. I'm too busy living a life filled with purpose and genuine love. James and I started the Harrison Foundation for Literacy, and I've taken a leave from the library to run it full-time. We've opened reading centers in underserved communities, funded mobile libraries for rural areas, and created scholarship programs for aspiring teachers. The other day, a little girl at one of our reading centers asked me why I chose to help kids learn to read instead of doing something more glamorous. I told her that there's nothing more glamorous than opening up entire worlds for someone, then giving them the tools to learn and grow and dream bigger than they ever thought possible. That's what real wealth is. Not the number in your bank account, but the impact you have on others. Not the respect you command because of your status, but the respect you earn through your actions. Not the power you hold over people, but the power you give to people to transform their own lives. Victoria thought she was putting me in my place that night at Constellation. What she actually did was help me find my true place, standing beside someone who loves me for exactly who I am, building something meaningful together, proving that character will always triumph over privilege, and kindness will always be more valuable than cruelty. If this story inspired you to stand up for yourself or someone else, to value character over status, or to believe that your worth isn't determined by your bank account, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. What would you have done in my situation? Let me know in the comments below, and remember that sometimes the most powerful response to cruelty is simply being your authentic, valuable self. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.